Tuesday night, 17th of September, 2024, and I wasn't sleeping. I got up and looked out the bedroom window at the big harvest moon. I knew tides would be running high the following day, and I had a long way to go. I also had to have an early start as I needed slack water at the Falls of Laura, so I wasn't running them in a heavy-laden boat full of camping gear when the falls started picking up in the spring tide. I was also a bit apprehensive as I was heading off around Ardnamurchan Point and out to the Small Isles of Muck, Rum, Canna and Egg, which involved several 10 miles or more open sea crossings. I prayed for a calm sea and went back to bed. Excitement meant I had no problems getting up early, and I was launching and underway from Taynuilt before the sun got out of bed. A happy cruising speed of 15 miles per hour to conserve fuel burn, and I was heading down Loch Etive towards Connell Bridge and the Falls of Laura. I estimated the main flow would start around 10 a.m, so timed my passage for slack water at 8:30 a.m. My prayers had been answered. It was a calm, cloudless day as I passed under the bridge without any issues. The Falls of Laura were still sleeping, as were the crews of the 2 fish boats that anchored in the shelter of the bay, waiting the start of a new day. My plan for the day was to go from Taynuilt, cross the Firth of Lorne, up the Sound of Mull, and if sea conditions allowed, around Ardnamurchan, cross to the island of Muck, and up the southwest side of Rum and on to Canna, a distance of around 80 miles. I was carrying 100 litres of fuel as I intended staying at sea for 5 days or more, weather dependent, of course. Passing Dunstaffnage Marina and entering the Firth of Lorne, the sea surface was mirror smooth. I wondered what the Lismore tide race would be like in the big spring tide. It was well behaved, but I could feel the force of the tide flowing around the boat. It didn't take long to reach Tobermory, and I was delighted to find the sea was still calm, meaning I'd have no problems rounding Ardnamurchan Point. The lighthouse came into view, and beyond it I could now see the island of Muck, with Drum behind it, and then the faint outline of the island of Skye way beyond it. I settled into the rhythm of the sea as I crossed to Muck. I set course for the northwestern tip of Eilean na Neich off the end of Muck, and rounded it to get a lovely view of the island of Eigg, its Scour Ridge looking long and unpenetrable from its angle. As it was lunchtime, I headed for Gallinach Bay and Muck to land in Havelegg Stretch. And of course having my coffee and sandwich while enjoying the view. I also let the drone loose for its exercise. It was such a lovely day, which helped make up for such a poor August. I decided conditions were good enough to continue on to Canna, the furthest away of the Small Isles. I bid my farewell to Muck, and once again carefully avoiding the rocky reefs of Gallinach Bay, I made my way across the Sound of Rum. It can be a rough stretch to see, however I was delighted that this time it was super smooth. I was looking forward to seeing Rum's remote, rugged coastline from close quarters. Also, I didn't land at Harris Bay, which is approximately halfway along the southwest coast of Rum. I did pause to admire the old Harris Lodge and Mausoleum. John Bullock and Sir George and his wife Lady Monica are buried here. Sir George was a late Victorian playboy who built Kinloch Castle on the other side of Rum. Nearing Schooner Point, I knew there are often overfalls in this area caused by tidal flow. However, as the tide had not long turned, there was little more than the rolling swell, and it had been theirs along the whole length of the Rum coast. So now was the time to do the last sea crossing to Canna. I guess I should be technically correct and say I was heading for a hidden sandy beach on the western side of Sandy. This island joins the island of Canna. It is one of my all-time favourite beaches. Sandy is joined to Canna by a bridge at high tide, though it is part of Canna at low water. I anchored in the shelter of the bay, my plan being to have a walk, then camp in the boat overnight on the island. I enjoyed the exercise after sitting in the boat for so long. It was lovely being back here again, as it had been a couple of years since my last visit. I stopped at the small memorial archway and placed a shell in it, and I made my wish. I wished that I would return to the island again someday. I know in previous visits I always wished that I could revisit again the following year, but this time round I simply wished I could revisit the island again, sometime. It was during my walk and recalling previous visits where sometimes I had a bumpy journey back to the mainland, or perhaps the remoteness made me feel very vulnerable, and I changed my mind about camping here overnight. Instead, I decided to head back to the island of Eigg and have a good night's sleep in the comfort of my tent, knowing the boat would be safe in the harbour there. I clambered back into the boat and headed off, and I'm glad I decided to leave, as it was soon very obvious the swell was increasing in size. I now judged it to be around 6 or 7 feet high. In truth, a high rolling swell doesn't bother me, but I did wonder what the Schooner Point overfalls would be like now the tide was in full flow. It was not as bad as I expected, but I did keep further offshore to avoid the rebounding turbulence, and I could tell there was a lot of water flowing around the point due to the high spring tide. It's not a coastline I would like to have an engine failure on. Not another boat in sight, and I knew the breaking waves would rip inflatable tubes to pieces if I was swept onto rocks. A sobering thought indeed, as I also know there was nowhere to land until I reached the island of Eigg. So once again I settled into the rhythm of the sea and enjoyed the journey. If you're wondering, I produce the soundtrack. I appreciate it as very repetitive, but that is my way of trying to convey the repetitive nature of the rolling swells. Leaving Rum, the crossing to Eigg was still relatively smooth. This part of the journey was interrupted by the arrival of, yep, you guessed it, the smiling assassins many folk call playful dolphins. Initially, it looked as though they were only crossing my path, but dolphins being dolphins, they altered their course to assess what it was all about. I felt a couple of whacks of tails slapping the bottom of the boat as they ran alongside or under a bow wave. Presumably they whacked the hull to see if it's soft and squidgy, like a large salmon, and I often wonder if I was soft, would they toss me in the air and scoff me? Which is why I tend to think of them as smiling assassins. Once they realised I was hard and too big to eat, they then veered off and continued on their original course, Well, I kept heading for the island of Eigg. The rolling swell reduced in size as I approached Eigg. Not that the light wind changed any that I had noticed, so I presume the swells off from were either because of a strong wind well out at sea, or because of the extra tidal flow caused by the harvest moon. It was now early evening, and I was looking forward to reaching my destination. It had been a long day, but at least I knew I would get a good night's sleep in Eigg, and not have to worry about the following day's weather. Finally, after travelling over 90 miles that day, I landed in the shelter of Eigg Harbour, set up camp, cooked sausages for supper, and then I was kindly invited by a guy called David to join him for a beer or three at his fire. We blethered under the big harvest moon until it was time to go to bed. I slept like a log that night, having thoroughly enjoyed my day. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.